Welcome to the Kayak Bass Connection podcast. I'm your host, Jared. This episode is all about taking your fishing to another level. I'm laughing a little bit because we've been battling some technical difficulties, but this time it's working great. My co-host today, Caden Cox. Caden, thanks for hanging in there, man.
Hey, no problem. Happy to be here.
We are sitting down with the Southern Illinois Kayak Club Angler of the Year for 2023, Mr. Darren Hemker. Darren, thank you for sitting down with us tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me on here. Glad to be here.
The thing about Darren is that if you don't know him, not only is he an incredible angler, but he also is very open. As a matter of fact, he described himself as an open book in our interview earlier, and he just takes pride in helping people become better anglers, even if they're competitors. That's one of the reasons I'm looking so much forward to getting this interview out there. He not only dominated the 2023 season, but also led his kayak fishing team to a big victory in the Crossroads Championship last year. So there's a lot of good information that we're going to try to get out of Darren. He's always so willing to help us out. So first of all, Darren, I'm really curious. How did you find yourself sitting in a plastic boat in a kayak fishing tournament? Your first go around, what road led you to get involved with kayak tournaments?
I grew up just like everybody else fishing small lakes and ponds here around the house, and nothing too crazy, and got to where I would watch YouTube videos on how to catch bass and stuff like that. And then going into high school, my good buddy Reese Schneider, he fishes in the club also. He was telling me that he was going to get a kayak and he was going to start trying to fish some kayak fishing tournaments. And I said, oh, okay. Didn't really think too much of it. And then he said that he fished one or two and he liked them and maybe I should try it too. So I bought a kayak and joined the next year. And my first tournament was an online tournament because it was actually the year of COVID. And our first tournament was an online tournament, and I won our first tournament that I ever had. And I went to the first in-person tournament, and I was riding high because I had done great on my online tournament, and got to the first in-person tournament, and I think I caught 3 fish that day. Had a really, really bad day of fishing, but from that point on, I told myself I wanted to be a better angler, wanted to learn how to catch fish, and wanted to be the best on the water every time I go out there. And I think I did that last year, and I hope to keep doing that in the future.
Yeah, I'd say you reached that goal, certainly in our club, and as it appears in many clubs, from your dominating performance at the challenge series that we had last year at the end of the season. So what kind of, you said, I was curious about one thing you said, I watched YouTube. So what kind of YouTube did you watch, do you think helped you to become a better angler? There's tons of channels out there. Which ones did you focus in on?
Honestly, I focused on smaller channels. So whenever I first started watching YouTube videos, I was watching like Guggen Squad before the Guggen Squad was a thing. I learned basically everything I know about fishing from YouTube. I didn't have anybody to sit here and teach me how to catch largemouth, how to do this. Everybody in my family catch catfish. That's all they ever did. And I always wanted to catch largemouth, so I'd spend 2 hours out fishing, and I'd come home and watch YouTube the rest of the night before I go to bed. And my mom would always be mad at me because I was watching YouTube so many hours, just trying to learn, trying to stuff as much information as possible into my brain. And it got to a point now that I can go to a lake, and as soon as I get to the lake, I have a couple baits in mind instantly of just what I think the fish are going to be biting that day. And it takes a long time of learning to get to that point, in my opinion.
So that's interesting. You said when you get to a lake, you already got in your mind a couple different types of baits that you think should do the job. So what kind of factors come in to reaching what those baits are going to be for the day?
So the weather is a huge factor on anytime you go out. Weather's a huge factor. I personally like fishing with some sort of factor. I hate a calm bluebird day. I hate it. It is, in my opinion, one of the toughest times to catch fish because those fish know what a bluegill looks like in the water, and on a calm bluebird day, they can sit there and look at the bait for a while before they eat it. Versus you go on a windy day or a day where the water stained from a previous rainfall the day before, or anything like that, or where the water temperature is changing from what it has been. I like that because those fish, they know what the bluegill looks like, but if it's coming by them at a super fast speed, they just turn around and eat it out of reaction because they have to eat it. They are hungry. I mean, these fish, They literally have to eat to survive. People just think, oh, the fish aren't biting today. Well, the fish have to bite because if they don't eat, they don't live. That's how that works. If you go a whole day without eating, you're going to be hungry. So I put it in my brain works like that. I know other people don't probably look at it the same way, but that's the way I like picturing it.
That's interesting. So as you went through that, what are your, if you had to name, a couple different baits that you always like to have at your disposal, based on those conditions, what kind of baits are those are?
So I
What are
always have a
those
chatterbait
baits?
tied up, no matter where I go, what time of the year. Heck, I went out fishing 2 or 3 days ago. The water temperature is 45, 46 degrees, and I was throwing a chatterbait, just throwing. You kind of
Mm.
think about a fish in the water whenever it's cold is going to be cold, so they're not going to be moving as much. Slower baits and like a crankbait, you want a tight wobbling crankbait whenever the water's cold, stuff like that. Then you get to the warmer water whenever it's like super, super hot. The fish are going to feed hard in the morning, so you got to capitalize on that morning bite. You want to be throwing top water early in the morning, stuff like that. Those fish are going to move offshore or up into the shade whenever it starts getting hot and stuff like that. You kind of, after you've done it for a while, you change baits and stuff like that without even thinking about it. If anybody I've ever fished anywhere around, they follow me down a bank, I will throw fish for say 100 yards. In that 100 yards, I will throw 10 different baits. Oh, just changing nonstop. I love changing baits until I find something that I can consistently catch big fish on over and over again. So you asked me what I have tied on. As long as I have a chatterbait and a wacky rig tied on, everything else can change.
So you mentioned already, you talked about weather a lot.
Mhm.
What about water clarity? How does that make you assess the different baits? Choose one
So
bait over
the
the other.
dirtier the water, the louder the bait. If in my opinion, I like a louder bait. So if I'm throwing a chatterbait, if I have really really dirty water, I will step up from my normal mini max. So my chatterbaits, I love a mini max. By far my favorite, and all the water clarities we fish around here. In the springtime, whenever it starts getting really cloudy, I'll throw more of a jackhammer or even up to a big blade if it's really really excuse me, if it's really really like cloudy water or something like that, I will throw a big blade. But if you get into water that's super super clear, I don't personally like spinner baits or anything like that has a lot of flash like that, because I think it almost scares fish off. I want something that flashes but not flashes a lot. So an underspin in clear water, I love throwing an underspin in clear water. That's a great technique in
Hmm.
my opinion, just because it flashes, but it doesn't flash obnoxiously like your spinner baits would. I like spinner baits whenever it's super super muddy water. Just reading the conditions is something that you don't just learn overnight. You gotta go and you gotta fish the conditions and get to a point that you have a lot of confidence in throwing certain baits in certain conditions.
So part of that building confidence was failure. Some of that as
Oh
well.
yeah, a lot of failure. A lot more failure than success, that's for sure.
Uh, yeah, I had a conversation with a fellow on the water the other day, another kayak angler, and I was telling him about this channel, and he said, "Well, I need to get better." He said before I start fishing some tournaments, but I told him, I said, I think the best thing you can do to get better is to go out and fish some of these
Fish the
grassroots tournaments.
tournaments.
Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. If you go to a tournament, and I don't know how everybody else's mindset is, whenever I go to a tournament, if I get my butt kicked and I lose and don't do great, it makes me want to do better on the next time. I want to beat those people because I want to be good enough that I can beat anybody I fish around. And I want to be good enough that I can teach people I fish around. I've told many people already in the club, one of my most memorable, like upsetting tournaments I had last year was Kincaid tournament, and I won that tournament. I went to the tournament. I saw people at the boat ramp, talked to them a little bit, and then left. And I didn't see another kayaker on the water all day long. I went to the south part of the lake. I think I saw maybe one person and talked to him for like 2 seconds, and just in passing. And that tournament, it hurt that I didn't get to sit around and talk to people. My favorite tournament of the year was probably our last club tournament of the year there at Cedar, and fishing with James. I fished with
Mm-hmm.
James for 4 or 5 hours, and just exchanging stories and listening to the way that he's trying to attack that tournament that day. It fascinates me to talk to people like that. I love talking to people. I could talk to a damn fence post to talk back.
So the social aspect is important, is what I'm hearing you say. Is it just learning from other
100%.
anglers?
And just going out and so that angler
Mm-hmm.
that you could have, yeah, you talked to, he's just going out and he's learning it his own way by himself. Personally, I would learn more from going and fishing next to other people and learning how they caught fish on the same day that I didn't catch fish. That helps me learn. That's what I love about our kayak series is that even after a tournament
Mm-hmm.
or during a tournament, we're all sitting around talking. We tell everybody how we caught those fish that day, and you don't see that in many other tournaments at all. You just see people going out and competing against each other, and then they all leave. We'll sit around. Heck, I've sat around for 2 or 3 hours after a tournament is over and just talk to people. I love talking to people.
Caden, you've got more experience in boat tournaments as an angler than I do. So is that a similar experience or is it different?
I mean, no, not at all. I mean, if you're in a boat tournament, from my experience, you pull up on somebody 100 yards away, you cast towards their boat. That's you're asking for them to come at you and fight in the parking lot after the tournament. I mean, you don't do that. And I mean, if you ask them what they're throwing, they're going to tell you a bait. I mean, they're not going to tell you nothing, and they're just it's just I don't know how to explain it. The camaraderie and everything in our tournament series is next to none. I mean, boat tournaments and kayak tournaments completely different. And what he said about learning is that's a big thing. Is just hearing other people. I've made myself a better angler, not even from going out and fishing, just from hearing what people have to say after a day fishing.
Awesome. Learn from other people. That's big. I think with anything in life, you've got to be willing to fail in order to get better. Because the famous saying that I use all the time in my professional work is that amateurs train until they get it right, pros train until they fail. Because you're always just pushing yourself, to that next step. So, so some of the things that I know that get some people spun up and on tournament day, and I say some people meaning me, it's happened to me, is the mental aspect of attacking some of these tournaments. I think specifically back to just about a year ago now when we had our classic tournament at Cedar Lake, which everybody, we all love Cedar Lake. I had a horrible day fishing there. Horrible. Tell me about your day.
I,
Your
I
day was
had
different.
probably the best day I ever will have on the water. I finished the day with 103/4 inches, and to get to that point, I started out the day. I got there and I had a game plan. I looked at a map the day before, and my pregame on most lakes I go to, I look at the map and I try to figure out where are these fish, what stage are they in their progression throughout the year. They go through certain stages, they spawn, and then they post spawn go on throughout fall, feed up, and stuff like that. I try to think what stage are these fish in, number one, and then from that stage, what are these fish doing right now? Where do I need to go to catch these fish right now? I don't care about in 2 days from now. I want to know today, where are these fish at? So whenever I got to the lake on Cedar, and I had not pre-fished it before that day. I got there, checked the water temp as soon as I got on the water and saw what it was. It was mid 50s, I believe, maybe upper 50s. It was not near spawning weather yet. I believe it was like
Mm-hmm.
54, 55, 56 degrees, if I remember correctly.
And a
And
45-mile-an-hour wind. Yeah, it was horrible.
that was the big kicker. A lot of people think a high wind day like that is going to push bait up, and during the summertime, pushing bait is huge. In the wintertime, those fish, in my opinion, don't want to fight that wind. They don't want to have to be in the current. So there's not really a current, but there's still obviously there's a current going around points and stuff like that. The fish that day I found were on nothing banks, so nothing, no structure, nothing specific like that, but the sun was shining on it and the wind was not hitting it. It was protected from the wind and the sun was shining on it. Those are my most productive banks by far. I caught a lot of my fish on banks that if I went by on a normal day, I wouldn't even hardly cast at. There's just nothing there to attract fish, but the fish were there because there was nothing there to get in their way, and they could just sit there and bask up the sun all day long. And I think I was reeling a chatterbait by their head, just nice and slow, and they came by them. They saw an easy meal coming by their head that they didn't have to work for, and they just came up and ate it. And I believe, 10 fish over 18 inches that day, and my small fish of the day was 19 and a half inches. I had an absolutely incredible day.
Yeah, it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. So what you talked about, what you were looking for, just in general for that tournament anyway. So let's just talk in generalities. What do you do as far as a study of the lake you were going to before a tournament?
So that one was, in my opinion, going to be a pre-spawn tournament. So I was looking for spots that I have historically caught a lot of fish pre-spawn, not just on that lake, on any lake I've ever been on pre-spawn. So a lot of the big fish I've caught pre-spawn in the past have typically come in shallow pockets that are near deep water. So I looked at the map and I could see a couple arms in the middle of the lake that I liked, and I liked them because they were decently shallow, but they could get to the fish could get to main lake and get in deep water very quick if they
Mm-hmm.
needed to, if there was something that would arise where they had to. And I think that fish love having big fish especially love being able to be in close proximity to that deep water as an escape route, and especially for the spawn and pre-spawn, that's where one of the first places they pull up is those shallow banks that are near deep water. And I've historically caught a lot of fish in shallow spots like that.
Awesome. Is there any or do you do a lot of map study before those tournaments then to find out where those areas are?
Typically the pre-spawn bites I will, and then as it gets
Mm-hmm.
into the fall, I'll look for the creek arms. And other than that, during the main part of the summer, I'll look for a few humps and stuff like that. But I don't study them too much. I play it more by ear. I get to the lake and I I look at the lake and I'm like, okay, where would a fish be? Where are these fish
Mm-hmm.
going to be? And I act like I'm a fish and try to find them.
Okay. Think like a fish. That makes a lot of
Exactly.
sense. So looking back at your Angler of the Year winning performance last year, um, are there any particular moments either that you thought, man, there's no way I'm going to reach that Angler of the Year title because this day is not going great, or have you had any of those? Did you have any of those bad experiences last year just stick out at you? Like,
Starting out the
I'm glad I
year,
handled that right.
winning the classic, starting out the year, that set me out on a high note. And after last or the year before last, 2 years ago, whenever I got second by a quarter inch at the classic, I was it lit a fire inside of me. I wanted to win Angler of the Year. So going into last year, winning that classic right away, that I was so happy. And then I went to Newton and did good at Newton, and I was doing good. And basically the whole year was going good. I had a bad tournament at Banner, but that's going to happen. I mean, people are going to have bad days of fishing, and I didn't get too discouraged. I don't get discouraged very often anyway. I'm a pretty upbeat guy. I don't. I'll break a rod or something, and it doesn't affect me too much. I mean, it sucks, but hopefully I caught my fish out of that rod and go on catch fish with the other ones. So I'll
Uh,
the biggest low part, honestly, was probably the last tournament of the year, and it ended up being the highest part of the year because I got to the tournament. As soon as I got out of my truck, my phone fell off my lap, hit the concrete or the asphalt there, and
oh
cracked my
no.
phone. And that I was like, man, that's how today's gonna go. And that tournament, it came down to me and Kessler for Angler of the Year. And that tournament, I don't know if you guys remember, was the tournament. Whoever did better basically won. I think
Mm-hmm.
I was losing by a point or winning by a point. I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure, but
you went into the
very
day.
close.
Yeah, you went in as in second place.
I believe so. Yep. And it was one of those tournaments that I broke my phone right away, and I get on the water. I wasn't pedaling. If people that know Cedar on that north ramp, I didn't even make it to that first point that sticks out into the middle of the lake. I made it almost to that point, and my pedal drive just stopped working. And I, whenever you break your phone and then your pedal drive goes out, you're like, well, what else could go wrong? Let's go catch some fish anyway. And I thought about turning around and I was like, well, this is for all the beans. So I toughed it out and I caught fish. Honestly, I don't think I would have caught those fish if my pedal drive had not have broken because I ended up catching
Yeah.
those fish, throwing a jig into tall grass along the bank, and those fish were basically pushed way up in those grass, eating all the shad or not the shad, the bluegill up in that grass. And I caught them by throwing a jig into the backs of those grass spots and catching them.
That's a great example of taking a bad situation and making the best of it. I mean, a lot of people would have just spun out. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 phone now got a cracked screen, and you know, pedal drives are not cheap. So right
No,
off the bat, you're like, oh my gosh, what a
I,
horrible day.
I just got the parts
So
actually for
credit.
my pedal drive and got her fixed up, and she that was two
Did
hundred
you?
dollar mistake. Yep. I looked
Yeah.
inside
Okay.
there, and the main drive gear that comes up was completely just basically there was nothing left of it. There was no teeth left on the
Oh.
gear at all. I believe it was
Oh my
my fault
gosh.
though. It was nothing on native. I believe I didn't tighten the
Yeah.
crank arms tight enough. You're supposed to tighten them down to 27 foot-pounds, and I just kind of pushed it tight and called it good and never actually measured it. So I used a torque wrench this time, put it to 27 foot-pounds. So as long as I read it right, I haven't done the right way this time. But
Well, that's a great example of controlling that which you can't control, right? You
exactly, I
now know
control my
your drive
controllables.
is sealed up correctly. Yeah, and going from there. So well, that was a kind of a low point. Then you ended up turning that crisis into an opportunity to slow down and to fish maybe targets that you wouldn't have fished normally, at least in the
Exactly.
same
It
manner.
forced me to fish for fish that I knew were there and I couldn't get to bite in the first place. And then I figured out a way to make them bite. And I genuinely think I would have just passed those fish by and tried to find different fish if I had my pedal drive.
Well, that's interesting. Don't you think it's kind of the same story with big boats with the gas motors? It's like the difference between us and them is they can just push go and be at a different part of the lake.
That's
So
why
you kind
I
of
talk to
got the
people all
kayak
the
version.
time. I talk to people all the time. And whenever I'm talking to them, they're like, oh, why don't you get a boat? And I was like, in my opinion, this is a very controversial statement, but in my opinion, a kayak angler, a very good kayak angler, is better than any boat angler because a boat. Not saying the boat angling, I'm sure it has its own challenges. But in a boat, you can just be like, oh, there's no fish here. Drive 5 miles up the lake, and you can be there in 15 minutes, and you're good to go fishing already. Versus in a kayak, you're kind of stuck in a set area. You can only fish a certain area unless you're going to sacrifice 2 hours of your time to get to the other side of the lake, and it
Mm-hmm.
forces you to fish what you have.
Oh, absolutely. Really well said. We see that all the time. And when you're out in a tournament session, say I'm fishing on a point or something, and it's not unusual for them to have bass boat tournaments the same day as we're having tournaments, and there'll be 3 or 4 bass boats that'll fly up in that point, stop, fish for 5 minutes, and then fly off. Just
Too
like a
many
parade of them.
opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And you're there, right? So if you're a good angler like you are, right, you capitalize on that and make that happen. So that was a negative. We talked about negative things that have happened. Did you remember what was the highlights of last year? When did you really feel great about what you're accomplishing?
The highest part of the year that comes to mind every time I think of me kayak fishing, I mean the Sick Classic. Our classic last year was an unbeatable day. Putting up over 100 inches in a day is
Yeah.
it does not happen often, especially in Illinois. That's like unheard of. It doesn't happen. And then from there, the next high part was probably winning the Crossroads, like being first place individual there. That was. It was a dream of mine whenever I went to Indiana and fished the Crossroads in Indiana 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. I
Mm-hmm.
fished there and I think I ended up like 11th overall. And I was like, man, it would be it would be awesome to be able to win this. And then the next year, I think I finished fourth or fifth last year and then came to this year and I won it. And I knew I could win it going into it. I just had to capitalize on my opportunities and not mess up. And I didn't mess up I think I lost. I honestly, day one, I think I could have broke 100 inches. I lost two fish. I think that were both over 20 inches that day, but
Um,
I messed up and I still got lucky and I still won it. And I had an amazing day on the water there. And after that, I went to the KPR championship up on Banner Marsh and I got third place there. And it was a smaller tournament and I was fishing against people that have fished it many times before. And I'd only been to Banner 3 or 4 times, so I didn't really know a whole lot about it. And the day one went by and I had 93 inches and I was basically tied for
hey,
first place. I was in third place, but all three of us had 93 and a quarter inches. And day two, I didn't have quite as good of a day and I caught fish, but I didn't catch any big fish really. And I ended up getting third place overall, but it, it wasn't as, I thought it was going to be way more of a gap than what it was. And I was happy with the way it turned out.
now you described something earlier. I want to dig in a little bit more. Can you describe why you have to be so adaptable as you go along, as the conditions for the day change, and what makes you think I need to make a change, whether location or bait or both? What are some of the things you see that clue you in that you need to make that change and completely change your game plan and
So I whenever I get on the water, I am extremely open-minded. I don't know if any of you have
Mhm.
followed me. I throw baits everywhere. I throw every bait I have on my kayak all day long. I don't stick to one bait very often at all, but I'll go to a lake, and instead of just having one specific plan to catch fish doing this, my plan is to catch fish somewhere on this lake today. I'm here to catch a fish. I'm going to do everything in my power to catch them. So going to Newton last year, I started out trying to fish shallow, throwing a Senko, and I don't think I ended up catching my fish doing that. I ended up catching them a little deeper than that throwing a Senko, but I was still throwing a Senko, so I was close with my original game plan, but it wasn't exactly. And at every tournament I go to, I start out very open-minded, and as I start catching fish on certain baits, then I start closing my sights in on that specific technique. So instead of starting with, oh, I'm going to throw a chatterbait today, I'm going to start out throwing literally everything. I'll start out throwing a chatterbait, then 2 seconds later I'm throwing a frog, then 2 seconds later I'm throwing a crankbait. I throw. Anybody that has followed me sees I use every rod on my kayak at all times. I'm basically the definition of ADD on a kayak.
Yeah, I know that your boat usually looks like a tackle store, going down going down the lake. But man, you're putting up numbers. It's working for you. So talked about different types of rigs you have on your deck. Is there one or two rigs that are always ready to roll,
No
regardless of
matter
where you're
what,
bass fishing?
any time of year, I went out 2 days ago and I had my chatterbait tied up. Chatterbait is my baby. I
Okay.
have my one specific rod's my chatterbait rod. That's my baby. I live and die by a chatterbait, or I used to anyway. I used to only throw a chatterbait, and the fish weren't biting the chatterbait. I wasn't catching fish. But I have a
Ah,
chatterbait and a wacky rig tied up, and I'll have like my frog rod or popper rod. But other than that, I'm pretty open minded. I'll have a jig tied on, but I'll change up what kind of jig, what style of jig, everything like that. I change it all up quite often. I'm not too set in my ways. Besides my chatterbait and I keep calling it Senko my wacky rig. It's not a true Senko. It's the 4-inch zoom finesse worm, and I hook it in the middle,
oh,
and I absolutely love that little bait. It falls super super slow, so a lot of people don't have the patience to throw it. But I have caught so many big fish. My biggest fish I've ever caught actually came on that. I caught a 7-1 on that little 4-inch finesse worm. So
wow.
that was on Lake X.
That's no Lake X.
Hell
Yeah.
yeah.
uh, so that's no weight whatsoever. Just a
Nope,
hook.
just the hook.
And
Every once in a while, I will Nico rig it, and like right now, I have it on
mhm.
there, and I have it Nico rigged. But a lot of the times, I'm just throwing weightless because it falls so slow in the water column, and it sits in front of that fish for so long. That fish just cannot resist it. Honestly, so a lot of people. This goes back to me throwing all my different baits. A lot of people think, oh, these fish are only eating this bait on this day. A fish goes through the water, and a largemouth bass is an opportunistic feeder. They eat anything they possibly can whenever they can eat it. So I like throwing everything at them until I find something that makes them eat it today. So yeah, I'll throw wacky rig or chatterbait or whatever, mimicking different things that I'm trying to get them to eat. And then once I start catching bigger fish on one technique, then I'll zero in and only throw that technique to try to catch bigger fish. But if you look at my Kincaid tournament, it's a great example of this. Last year, Kincaid, I caught 5 keepers, and I think I caught it on 4 different baits. I caught one on a frog, one on a chatterbait, on a wacky rig, and I think I flipped on one. It, it made no sense. My big fish of the day came on a frog at 1 p.m. It made no sense at all. But you throw random stuff like that, and that
Mhm.
frogfish is exactly. I was pedaling down this bank, and I was throwing a chatterbait down this bank and the grass edge, and I look up underneath this tree, and I was like, man, that looks like a great place to catch a fish on a frog. Cast up in there, and I didn't get a perfect cast on my first cast, and I reeled back in real quick and threw it back up in there, and it skipped up underneath there. I popped it twice and caught an 18.5-inch fish up underneath the tree. I
Wow.
just said that's where I think a fish would be. It's just it. I've done it
Think like a fish.
long. Yeah, I've done it long enough. I think like a fish. Anytime I go out there, I'm thinking like a fish, and I'm still very very new into this sport. So I'm hoping as I continue along, I learn a lot more than what I already know now. And I go to the water expecting to learn from somebody else. I don't go to the water thinking, oh, I know everything about this lake. I'm going to win. I go to the water thinking, okay, somebody out here is probably going to beat me. I want to know why they beat me, how they beat me, how I can beat them next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, that's having that open mind when you go out and launch in the mornings. You don't know, what you're going to run into. That obviously has paid off. Caden, do you have something?
No, nope.
Okay.
I'm just listening. My
Yeah.
things getting a little
A lot
funky
of good
on me.
information.
Yeah, just trying to learn something.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give someone that is fishing tournaments now and just wants to take it to the next level? What maybe hasn't been successful just yet?
So if you're very new into kayak fishing, if you have never, I'm gonna start out. If you have never fished a kayak tournament, go to a tournament. First biggest thing is try to catch 5 fish, and the 5 fish that you catch, try to make sure you get a good picture of every one of them. Don't have any deductions or anything like that on any of your pictures. After you get to the point that you think that you can do that no matter what, like I go to a tournament now, I don't even think about like making sure everything's perfect, and it has bitten me in the butt a couple times, but I go to a tournament and take a picture of my fish, and I don't really think about everything that goes into it. I just do it second nature. Once you get to the point that you can do all that second nature, then you want to try to get your 5 fish in the morning, and after you get those 5 fish, try to figure out how to get the biggest fish in the lake, not just fish in the lake. Because your bigger fish typically are doing something very, very specific from the other groups of fish. Your small 12 to 15 inch fish are probably doing whatever possible. They're eating the first thing that comes by their head, and that's why you can catch them throwing anything. Versus your bigger, older fish that have been fished for a while and know what's going on. Because some of these fish around here, your 5 pound fish around Illinois, Southern Illinois, it could be anywhere from a 5 to a 8 to 10-year-old fish. That fish has probably seen a lot of baits come by its head. So you got to think, what can I do to make that fish eat that he thinks this is a live bait? It's one of those things that as you do it more, you learn more about it, but you need to think about trying to catch those bigger fish in the lake if you're trying to step up your game.
I guess what do you think for me or anybody else? What when you pull up to that ramp for the first time? Because I only had fished one lake last year before any of the tournaments in person, and I just didn't know what to do, so I just did what I did and flipped brush and threw a chatterbait. What do you look for as soon as you pull up to a ramp the first time that tournament morning? The weather,
So
I'm guessing.
So whenever I get to a lake, I'm gonna do everything possible before, but I'm gonna look at the weather, everything like that, wind, stuff like that. But whenever I get to a lake, I want to know that water clarity. I'll get out and look at that water clarity instantly, and then I might have to change baits up because the water clarity could be muddier or cleaner than I was expecting or stuff like that. But I get to a lake and I think, okay, what in the past, what have I done to catch fish in this lake, or what have I done to catch fish in similar bodies of water, similar structure wise, similar everything like that. And then from there, I go, what's the main bait? So like I'll look on the map or on like IDNR does a great job of telling you what baits in the lake and stuff like that. If you look on each lake profile, I look and see, okay, shad is very prevalent in Cedar Lake. So your shad profile baits are going to do very good, but every lake in the state has bluegills. So bluegills are always going to do good no matter where you go. So I'll think, okay, is there bait busting on the surface as soon as I get to a lake? If I can see bait busting on the surface, that's probably a good indicator to go try to fish some of them bait balls. And then if I can't catch fish doing that, then I'm going to switch it up and go to like bluegill stuff. It really is by every lake is different in the state. I mean, they're obviously different bodies of water, but the way they fish is totally different. I'm not going to go to Newton and fish it the same way as Cedar, but I'm going to attack it sort of the same way. I'm going to start out throwing everything I have, and once I start catching fish, I'll narrow it down. And I feel like I'm very, very good about not sticking to my way. I change everything up all the time. I don't know if that answered your question, or if I just rambled on too much there.
It sure does. Nope, that's all right.
No,
that's
awesome.
Another thing you mentioned is adapt. That's a key thing I think to doing any sort of good and placing in anything is you have to adapt throughout the day.
Adaptation and going off your instinct. If you feel like I said earlier with the Kincaid tournament, I felt like, oh, there should be a fish underneath this tree. So I threw the bait up underneath there and caught it. Instinct is everything. If you get to a spot that you're like, man, I should throw this, but I don't have it. Oh, it's back there. I don't really feel like switching baits. No, take 2 seconds, make a cast with that. You didn't catch one, put the rod back, keep going with the bait you were using. It's huge to fish the moment. I know there's a YouTube channel called that, and I watch him every once in a while too.
That's great advice. So beyond the competitive aspect of the sport, because it is awful competitive, there's these are difficult tournaments to win. What do you enjoy most about fishing, or just the process of competing?
So I love talking to people. I love fishing, first of all. I love everything about fishing. That's my favorite thing ever. I'll go out fishing even if there's nobody there. But I tell people all the time,
Yeah.
my least favorite tournament of last year was Kincaid tournament. I went and fished it and I won the tournament. Had a great day of fishing. A great day. I caught 5 or 6 fish and they were keepers and they ended up winning the tournament for me. But that was my least favorite day of the year because I didn't get to talk to anybody. I got on the lake and talked to people at the boat ramp. Didn't talk to a soul all day long. I think I've talked to like 1 or 2 people in passing, but never got to sit and talk to people all day long. And then got back to the boat ramp and won it, and that was about it. We left, and that was it. I think about tournaments. I also won the Cedar tournament, but I sat at Cedar on that last tournament of the year through sick, and I won it. But I still sat there and talked to James all day long. He said, I mean, all day. I talked to him from about 10 o'clock a.m. all the way till the end of the tournament, 4, 5, 6 hours or whatever. All day, I just sat and talked to him,
Yeah.
and I actually gave him a bait to
Yeah.
catch more fish because I had these fish pretty dialed in and was very confident with the way I was catching the fish and the inch total I had. And I was like, here, throw this bait, catch the fish. There's so many fish in this lake. Somebody needs to be catching these fish.
That's great. So what you're saying is that it's the people as much as it is the fishing, right?
100%. I love the community that we've made here in Sick. It's a great community of people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I ran into somebody the other day on the water, and it was a kayak angler, and he had said, "Well, when I get better, I'm going to start fishing tournaments." And I kind of looked at him. I said, "Well, you may want to rethink that. You need to do that now." What would
Fish
you
tournaments to
told
get
that
better,
person?
honestly. You fish tournaments to get better. My first tournament I ever fished, first in-person tournament I ever fished, I got my butt kicked, and it made me want to get better. And I learned from the person that won that tournament. I listened to how they caught fish, thought about it, and then the next tournament I lost again and listened to how they caught fish, and just kind of kept building on it and building on it. And now, anytime I go to a tournament, I'm expecting somebody to beat me, but I want to learn how did they beat me so I can beat them next time. That's what I'm going after every time I hit the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you, you've been awesome. Been very given a lot of your time with this tonight, and been very open here. Appreciate that. I'm sure that the good nuggets information you dropped today are going to be listened to time and time again by some of those people you'll be fishing against next year. So, are you going to be able to come? I know you had some life changes with your profession and everything. Are you going to be able to come back and fish?
My goal is to not miss a
next year?
tournament. My goal is to never miss a sick tournament. As long as I keep fishing, I do not want to miss any of these. These are
Hey, congratulations on an amazing season. We look forward to seeing you again right behind us on the paychecks.
Hopefully not, but we'll see.
We look forward to seeing you again on the water soon. All right. Yeah. So, Caden, thank you for your time tonight as well.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for these podcasts. We really do appreciate it. Everybody that watches these, we really, really appreciate you putting all the time that you do into these.
Yeah, it's a labor of love. I really enjoy talking to everybody. So, all right. So those of you who are listening, make sure you could subscribe to the podcast. We will be doing further episodes here down the road. Never know what kind of good information we have.